All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into someone whose name you definitely know, Bill Gates.
Yeah, Bill Gates.
But how well do you really know Bill Gates?
That's right. Everyone kind of knows him as the Microsoft guy,
Right.
but there's a lot more to his story.
Yeah, for sure. You submitted his Wikipedia article, and it is extensive.
Yeah, it's a long one.
So there's a lot to unpack here, and we're going to try to do that.
So yeah, we're going to dive deep.
So let's start at the beginning with his early life.
All right.
Even as a kid, there are hints of, well, greatness.
All right.
I mean, congressional page at 12 years old.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, most 12-year-olds I knew were like playing video games.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it really shows that even as a young kid, he had this ambition, this drive that would later propel him to success.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely. And this kind of continues throughout his teenage years, too. The article mentions him getting banned from a computer lab for exploiting a bug.
Oh, yeah. That's a great story. Right. It kind of foreshadows some of his future business tactics, I think. Yeah. Finding loopholes, pushing the boundaries to get what he wants.
Totally. Like, even back then, he was already like a master hacker.
Right, exactly. He was fascinated by technology, but also by how to bend it to his will in a way.
Okay, so we've got this like brilliant kid, clearly pushing boundaries, but then he goes and gets almost perfect SAT scores.
I mean, he was obviously incredibly intelligent.
Yeah, and ends up at Harvard only to drop out.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. Dropping out of Harvard, especially for someone like Bill Gates. It says a lot about his willingness to take risks and to forge his own path.
Definitely not your typical path to success.
Not at all. And of course, that path led him to create Microsoft.
Right. And that founding story is pretty wild. Did you know that they basically bluffed their way into that first meeting with Mites, the company that was making the Altair 8800?
Yeah, they didn't actually have a working version of BASIC for the Altair yet. But they saw the opportunity. They pitched their vision, they landed the deal. It took a lot of hustle and some, clever maneuvering, but he pulled it off.
I mean, that's amazing. They basically got the contract based on like a promise.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It shows a lot of confidence, maybe even a little bit of audacity.
Yeah, for sure. And even back then, he was already thinking about software as a serious business. I mean, that open letter to hobbyists where he was basically calling them out for pirating his software.
Yeah, that was a pretty revolutionary idea at the time,
Mm-hmm.
Most people saw software as something you shared freely. But Gates, he recognized its value. He understood that to build a sustainable industry, software needed to be treated as a product.
So he was thinking way ahead in terms of like the business of software.
Absolutely. And that was a key turning point, I think.
Yeah.
It helped establish a framework for the entire software world as we know it today.
Wow. Okay. So then we get to this IBM partnership, which totally changed the game.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And what's fascinating is that Microsoft didn't even create the operating system. They licensed it from someone else.
That's right. They licensed MS-DOS from a company called Seattle Computer Products.
And that was like a genius move, right?
It was a brilliant strategic decision. Because they retained the copyright, they could license MS-DOS to other manufacturers, which led to this explosion of IBM-compatible PCs, all running Microsoft software.
So that one decision basically shaped the entire PC industry as we know it.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how one seemingly small choice can have massive ripple effects.
Yeah, it's incredible how these early decisions kind of set the stage for everything that came after.
Right, and that kind of strategic thinking, that ability to anticipate the future, it's a big part of why Bill Gates became so successful.
Okay, so let's fast forward a bit to Windows. The Wikipedia article gets a little technical here, but what should we really take away from this phase?
Well, the key takeaway, I think, is adaptability. The world of technology moves fast, and you've got to be able to pivot and adapt to stay ahead of the curve.
Right, constantly evolving.
Exactly, and Gates was always pushing Microsoft to evolve. They developed the graphical user interface of Windows to compete with Apple. Then they embraced the internet. It was all about staying relevant and staying ahead of the competition.
Yeah, that's a lesson for anyone, really, in any field. You've got to be willing to change and adapt to stay on top.
Absolutely. Complacency can be deadly, especially in the tech world.
Okay, so speaking of evolution, let's talk about Gates's management style. The Wikipedia article uses some pretty interesting words to describe it. Demanding, even a bit tyrannical.
Yeah, there are definitely some colorful stories about his management style. He was known for being very demanding and having a pretty short fuse sometimes.
I mean, you hear these stories about him, like, yelling at employees and throwing things.
Right, there was definitely a level of intensity there that some people found difficult to work with. But it's interesting to think about, was that intensity what pushed Microsoft to be so innovative?
Yeah, is it like that whole idea that sometimes you need that kind of tough love to achieve greatness?
Right. Or was it just plain toxic behavior? That's something we can ponder. There's no easy answer.
Definitely a complex issue. But then you look at his life after Microsoft, and it's like a complete 180. It's incredible how many different things he's involved in.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, this shift from building a tech empire to tackling these global challenges.
Yeah.
It seems like his motivations have fundamentally changed.
Totally. And this brings us to his work on climate change and energy. He's poured billions of his own dollars into research and innovation, trying to find solutions to some of the biggest problems facing humanity.
Yeah, he's really gone all in on this idea that technology can solve climate change.
Right. He's investing in things like nuclear fusion and even developing synthetic breast milk.
Yeah, that one raised a few eyebrows, but it actually highlights something important about his approach.
Right.
This belief that we can innovate our way out of any problem.
So he's putting his money where his mouth is, but is it the right approach? Can technology really solve a problem as complex as climate change?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one we'll have to keep exploring as we dive deeper into his work in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so make sure to join us for part 2, where we'll continue unpacking the many layers of Bill Gates, from his political views to his philanthropy to his personal life. It's going to get even more interesting, I promise. Welcome back. So last time we kind of left off talking about how Bill Gates is really dedicating himself to tackling some major global issues.
Yeah, he's shifted gears in a big way, hasn't he?
Yeah, for sure. So let's dive into that a bit more. The Wikipedia article has this whole section on his political positions, and it's interesting to see how his views have evolved over time.
Yeah, he's definitely become more outspoken in recent years, especially on issues like climate change and global health.
Right. He used to be pretty hands-off when it came to government regulation of the tech industry, but now he's actually engaging with world leaders and weighing in on some pretty big policy debates.
It's a far cry from the early days when he was just focused on coding and building Microsoft.
Totally. Like, the article even mentions him talking about Donald Trump's ban from Facebook and saying that a permanent ban would be a shame.
Oh, right. That was
Yeah.
a pretty controversial topic.
Yeah.
It raised all these questions about free speech and the power of these tech platforms.
Yeah, who gets to decide what we can and cannot say online? It's
Yeah.
a pretty big deal.
Huge. It's not just about one former president. It's about the future of online discourse and who has control over the narrative.
Definitely something to think about. And speaking of controversy, the article also mentions that Gates caught some heat for his stance on patents for COVID-19 vaccines.
Oh, yeah. That was a big debate. He opposed waiving intellectual property rights for the vaccines during the pandemic, which a lot of people criticize.
Yeah, I can see both sides of it. I mean, on the one hand, you want to incentivize companies to invest in developing new vaccines, but on the other hand, you want everyone to have access, especially during a global health crisis.
It's a tough one for sure. It really highlights the tension between innovation and equity. How do you balance the need to reward scientific progress with the need to make sure everyone benefits?
It's a complex issue, for sure. But let's talk about something a little more positive. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They're doing some seriously impressive work around the world.
Oh, absolutely. They're the largest private charitable foundation in the world. They've poured billions of dollars into fighting diseases like AIDS and malaria, improving sanitation, expanding access to education. It's really incredible, the scope of their work.
And what's really cool is that they're super transparent about their spending. They publish a lot of information about where the money goes and how it's being used.
Yeah, they really believe in accountability.
Yeah.
They want to show donors exactly how their contributions are making a difference.
Which is super important, especially when you're dealing with that much money.
Listen.
And beyond the foundation, Gates also makes tons of personal donations.
Right. He's a very generous guy. He's given millions to all sorts of causes. Everything from supporting universities to funding research on Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, and we can't forget about the Giving Pledge. He and Warren Buffett pledged to give away at least half of their wealth to charity.
Yeah, that was a huge deal when they announced that. It's inspired hundreds of other billionaires to do the same. It's like they're saying, hey, it's not just about accumulating wealth. It's about using that wealth to make the world a better place.
Which is pretty amazing when you think about it. It's like a whole new way of thinking about philanthropy.
Right. It's not just about writing a check. It's about making a real commitment to giving back.
Okay, so we've talked about his work, his philanthropy, but we haven't really touched on his personal life. And let's be real, there's been some drama there too.
Yeah, there has been. The Wikipedia article mentions his marriage to Melinda French, their divorce, his children, and even his hobbies like playing bridge and reading. It gives you a glimpse into the man behind the billions,
Right, reminds us that even someone as accomplished and famous as Bill Gates is still just a person with his own passions and flaws.
Exactly. He's not just a tech icon. He's a human being with a complex personal life.
And speaking of complex, we should probably talk about the divorce. It was huge news, and the Wikipedia article hints at some less than flattering details about Gates's behavior.
Yeah, the divorce proceedings did reveal some things that tarnished his image a bit. You know, there were allegations of infidelity, questions about his association with Jeffrey Epstein.
It's a reminder that even those who seem larger than life are still capable of making mistakes.
Absolutely, no one is perfect, and everyone has their own struggles.
But even with all that, you can't deny the impact Bill Gates has had on the world, both through his work at Microsoft and his philanthropy. He's a truly remarkable figure.
No doubt about it. He's a complex and contradictory figure, but one who has undeniably shaped the world we live in.
And before we move on, we should at least mention his books. He's written quite a few over the years, hasn't he?
Oh yeah, from The Road Ahead to Business at the Speed of Thought to How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. He's always been eager to share his thoughts and ideas with the world.
It's clear he's a deep thinker, and he's not afraid to tackle big, complex topics.
Definitely. And I think that's what makes him so fascinating. He's always pushing himself, always learning, always striving to make a difference.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this part, but there's still more to explore.
Yeah, we've only scratched the surface, really.
So make sure to join us for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll take a look at how Bill Gates has been portrayed in popular culture.
It'll be interesting to see how Hollywood has depicted this complex and controversial figure.
I'm sure there's some juicy stories there.
Oh, sure of it.
Welcome back to part 3 of our Bill Gates deep dive. It's crazy how much there is to talk about when you really start digging into his life and work.
Yeah, we've barely scratched the surface.
I know, right? But to wrap things up, I thought it would be fun to look at how Bill Gates has been portrayed in popular culture, in movies and TV shows.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. It's always fascinating to see how these larger-than-life figures are depicted in the media.
So what are some of the most memorable portrayals of Bill Gates on screen?
Well, there are a few documentaries that come to mind, like Triumph of the Nerds and Pirates of Silicon Valley. Those kind of capture the early days of the PC revolution, and they often show Gates as this brilliant but super competitive, sometimes ruthless businessman.
Yeah, like the classic Silicon Valley stereotype.
Right, exactly. But they also highlight his incredible drive and his vision. They show how he really was instrumental in creating the tech world we know today.
Okay, so not always the most flattering portrayals, but definitely interesting to see that side of him.
Yeah, and then there are documentaries that show a different side of him, like Waiting for Superman, which focuses on his work in education reform. You see him engaging with educators, trying to understand the challenges and using his resources to make a difference.
So it shows that he's not just about building software empires, he's actually trying to solve some of the world's biggest problems.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the Netflix docuseries Inside Bill's Brain, Decoding Bill Gates, that gives a much more nuanced look at him.
Yeah.
It explores his thinking process, his motivations, how he's shifted from being a tech CEO to this global philanthropist.
I remember watching that one. It was really cool to see how his mind works.
Yeah, and it also touched on his personal life, his marriage, his passion for tackling issues like climate change and disease eradication.
Yeah.
It's a really well-rounded portrait, I think.
Definitely gives you a much deeper understanding of the man behind the billions.
Right. And then, of course, we can't forget about his cameo appearances in shows like The Simpsons and The Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, those were classic.
It shows that he has a sense of humor about himself. He doesn't take himself too seriously, which I think is a good quality.
Yeah, for sure. So we've seen him portrayed as a ruthless techie, a visionary leader, a passionate philanthropist, and even a cartoon character. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it just goes to show how complex and multifaceted he is. There's no single way to define Bill Gates.
And I think that's what makes him so fascinating. He's a true enigma.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what are your final thoughts on Bill Gates? Has your perception of him changed at all?
Honestly, yeah. I think I used to see him as just this super rich tech guy, but now I have a much deeper appreciation for the work he's doing in the world. His philanthropy, his focus on solving these global challenges. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, I agree. He's definitely a complex and sometimes controversial figure, but you can't deny that he's trying to use his wealth and influence to make a positive impact. And that's something worth admiring.
Totally. So what's the big takeaway here for our listeners?
I think it's that people are capable of change and growth. Even those who achieve immense success can still strive to do good in the world. And Bill Gates' story is a perfect example of that.
I love that. And it's also a reminder that there's always more to learn about someone, even someone as famous as Bill Gates. This deep dive was just a starting point. There are books, interviews, documentaries, All sorts of resources out there for people who want to keep exploring.
Exactly. So keep digging, keep learning, and keep questioning. And who knows, maybe you'll discover something new about Bill Gates or even about yourself along the way.
That's a great way to end it. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bill Gates. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.